whether we're talking about cigarette smoking, vaping, or other nicotine containing devices or products. The nicotine is what it's so highly addictive. And so it very powerfully affects the dopamine reward system in our brains. And adolescents in particular have sort of this revved up reward system in their brains because they're still undergoing this brain development that will not be complete until they're in their mid to late 20s. And so during that time, they're at higher risk of developing addiction to any substance. But nicotine is a very powerful one.
You're listening to the smartsocial.com podcast. Each week, we help parents and educators keep students safe on social media so they can someday shine online. Before we get into today's program, make sure you join our newsletter to get the most up-to-date social media alerts at smartsocial.com/newsletter. Now let's get to the program.
Hi, I'm Dr. Dolly Klock. I'm a family medicine physician. I'm a mom of a high schooler and a college student, and I run a company called Adolessons, through which I do a lot of health education, basically, for parents, teens, and tweens. I run combined parent-child puberty workshops that I do privately and contract with a few schools doing that. And I do lots of groups with teens as well around topics like developing sexuality, body image, teen party culture, and more.
Doctor, it's so good to have you on here. We are longtime friends. I met you a decade ago when Smart Social was starting, and you were starting your incredible organization that does so many good things. But let's get down to the important stuff. You advised a TV show as a medical doctor, and yes, you're a dear friend of mine, and I'm singing your praises all the time. But when I brag to people about not only that you're a physician, I also tell them that this is my coolest story. Can you tell us what TV show you used to advise and in what capacity and for how many years and what you did there?
Absolutely. So I advised for almost a decade, I think, for a show called Scrubs that was actually the main character was based on my husband. He's JD. And we got involved and we were moving out from just finished our medical training and moved out to LA and were asked to both be advisors on the show. So we did a lot of behind the scenes consulting, on set consulting, and it was just a total blast. It was such a fun way to balance out all the other stuff I was doing clinically.
And so basically, if they were wearing their stethoscope wrong or whatever, you'd be like, hold on, that's the wrong phrase, the wrong this. Is that correct?
Yeah, we would help with like how to properly pronounce medical terms. Sometimes they would send us scripts and say, insert medical jargon, and we'd help them come up with medical scenarios, deal with the wardrobe, the set design, everything. Like, what does it look like and feel like to be a medical resident in a hospital? And fortunately, it was a sitcom, so there was lots of room for error. It's such a great cast and crew and just a joy.
I mean, I've had friends that have said that they laughed and cried in the same episode. Like
Yeah.
people absolutely love that show.
Yeah. Well, the executive producer, Bill Lawrence, is absolutely brilliant and one of the funniest people I've ever met in my life. And the writers were really talented too. So we take pride in the fact that medical residents still to this day watch that show together as they're going through their schooling.
Absolutely terrific. And I'm a huge fan of yours. Let's get to know what you're doing right now these days. And this is what I'm so proud about. Yes, you have a great background as a physician, but you've kind of turned and now you're helping kids of all ages. You're giving talks to small groups and big groups and a lot of tweens talking about puberty. We're going to give some inspiration to some schools and some PTAs and some parents. You're doing a lot of little post-its sort. Hey, anybody have any questions? Anonymously submit your questions middle end of the program and Dr. Klock will answer them. Talk to us a little bit about that before we dive in to our main topic. I want you to give us a trend of what questions are you seeing the kids ask?
Yeah, well, it really depends on sort of what topic I'm speaking on, but that to me, that's critical. I want to make sure, even when I'm in a cozier environment where it's like 10 or 20 kids in someone's home with their parents, I want to make sure that people have a chance to ask questions anonymously. When we're talking about the tweens, I mean, some of these questions are absolutely hilarious. So it's the part I look forward to the most because I never know what is coming my way. But I also let the parents ask questions anonymously because sometimes they don't want to ask the question in front of their child or have their child know who's asking. And then when I'm meeting with teenagers, it's usually just me with the teens, and same thing. I just want to make space for everyone to get their questions answered in a, medical, non-judgmental way. I'm all about health and safety and just being real, talking about things that actually are affecting these these kids.
If you test it and try it, and students are submitting things, then you start to see the trends and you can get smarter about presenting to students, right? And so I just love that you're testing that and trying it, becoming the best in your space. No matter what hat you wear, district leaders, we can be great at dialoguing with teens and making it relevant for them, which is one of my life's passions. And I know Dr. Klock's as well. Doctor, let's dive into the topic at hand. There's so much we could talk about, and I'm so proud of you and so honored to have you on here today. But I want to dive into something that's so crucial. In the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, smoking was cool. Now we know it has long term effects. We also know that there are new, more enticing ways to have kids think that they're not smoking, and everybody's calling it vaping. So I want to ask you some questions about vaping. I want you to toss in some new technology that they're telling kids about that are as small as this post it that everybody can see on the screen right now, little tiny things that we're going to talk about. So, Doctor, first, what are the immediate or long-term health risks associated with vaping for teenagers?
Because there's so much anxiety, for parents when we talk about substance use and kids, and that is completely understandable. I just want to set the stage by saying that this generation of adolescents is actually one of the healthiest we've had in terms of their use of substances. So just knowing that they're using all these substances at lower rates than our peer group was back in the day. And so that's there are some higher risks, however, with what's available today. And that's where the concern really comes from. Vaping is really something that took off several years ago. A company called Juul is the one that I think a lot of people have heard of, that youth use of nicotine delivery systems skyrocketed because of this company that was very effective in its marketing and was targeting young people and was presenting itself as a alternative to cigarette smoking, which it was for some adults potentially. But, these were flavored e-cigarettes is what we call them. And there are a whole bunch of different ones nowadays and different formulations and different flavors and stuff. But the flavors are one of the things that was really hooking the kids, and the fact that they were sort of sleek and discreet. It didn't have a horrible smell like cigarette smell. So period, back in the day, you knew if your kid was smoking in the house, you would smell it, right? Now it's like you open the door and it smells like bubble gum in the room. So it was something that kids were even able to do discreetly in class, and so youth use of nicotine really increased. And there was a big misconception among kids and even parents who thought maybe this wasn't such a big deal because of vaping, vapor, but it's really not a water vapor that they're inhaling into their lungs. It's an aerosol, and there's microfine particles, including lead, heavy metals. Some of the flavorings are known carcinogen, and this has like a profound effect on the lungs. And you asked about the effects, right? So there's like the short-term effects, which we weren't sure. We were always saying, oh, we need to wait for the long-term data. And then you may recall before the pandemic, before the COVID pandemic, there was the EVALI pandemic, right? Where we were seeing this vaping related lung injury back in like 2019. I remember doing a talk on this. And that's when parents really realize that this stuff is serious. So people were having acute lung injury. That big epidemic turned out to be largely related to vapes that contained cannabis products, and a specific preservative in there. That was what was causing most of it. But the point is that you can have acute lung injury when you're inhaling stuff, and also long term. Our lungs are designed to exchange oxygen, not all these little microfine particles, right? And so that's a setup for inflammation and lung disease.
Yeah, there's so much you just said that's so incredible. Once again, parents, if you're listening to this right now, thinking, okay, my kid's never vaping, things are not happening, I want to back up just for a sec. The only real way that we suggest at Smart Social, the only real safety app in the world, the only real safety precaution is going to be, and I know the doctor agrees with me, it's that relationship and dialogue, the rich dialogue you have with your kiddos. Google and Microsoft will not like alert you at 3 in the morning. Your kids might be doing something wrong. It's that inner gut that you have, that mama bear feeling you get. A lot of moms, 85% of our attendees are moms at my parent night events. We love dads too, but that rich dialogue is going to be the answer there. And talking with your kids beforehand, before they see that, and dialoguing with them about the truth is really going to be important here too. And that's why we're going to give you that information. So let's talk, doctor, about the addictive potential of vaping. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah. So, what makes all this stuff addictive is the nicotine, right? So, whether we're talking about cigarette smoking or we're talking about vaping or we're talking about other nicotine containing devices or products, the nicotine is what it's so highly addictive. And so it very powerfully affects the dopamine reward system in our brains. And adolescents in particular have sort of this revved up reward system in their brains because they're still undergoing this brain development that will not be complete until they're in their mid to late 20s. And so during that time, they're at higher risk of developing addiction to any substance. But nicotine is a very powerful one. And so we have this sort of like baseline of dopamine in our brains, which you could think of as like a feel good hormone. It's a neurotransmitter. It sends important signals for our brain function. And so when people start using nicotine products, there's a release of dopamine. There's also a release of other transmitters that usually are there to balance out that dopamine release. And so what ends up happening is they need more and more of the substance because the dopamine release becomes so large that the brain sort of resets its baseline level of dopamine to lower it. So then when the effects wear off over time, once people develop some dependence, they need to use more and more of that substance to get that dopamine up to like their regular baseline, meaning they're needing to use the nicotine more and more, no longer to feel that buzz or feel good, but just to feel normal again. And so that is very powerful. And I think people don't have the kind of concern about nicotine that they might around other substances, but it really does have a powerful effect in brains, particularly in still developing brains.
So scary. The next question I'd like for you to explain to us is, can you give us your opinion and the knowledge that you have and the data you have? How does vaping influence mood and mental health in teenagers?
But that's actually really important because, I mean, there's so many different reasons that kids use substances, and we can talk about that too. But when people first use nicotine, the effect in the brain is that feel good feeling, that buzzed kind of feeling. It also helps acutely, like people feel more focused, more motivated, more alert. But then that goes away, right? As the nicotine levels go down, those feelings go away. And where this becomes important is particularly in kids with mental health conditions and anxiety and depression and stuff. So sometimes they turn to substances to feel different or to feel better. And it can be very effective in the moment, right? And but what we know is when people start using it regularly, they will develop withdrawal symptoms, right? Their brains get used to having that nicotine around. And so when they're having those withdrawal symptoms, what that looks like is anxiety and it looks like irritability and it looks like decreased energy, right? And so that's comes back to what we were just talking about. Then suddenly kids are like, I feel like crap, right? I need to use this some more to sort of get back to functioning. I was interviewing a college student who uses a different form of nicotine that I think I have a feeling we're gonna get into. I was sort of asking him, "Well, how do you feel when you use it?" And he's like, "Oh, I don't get a buzz I'm just using it to get by at this point." Right? So this is the reality of what happens. It changes our brains, and there is a correlation with anxiety and mood disorders, particularly for kids who are managing mood disorders and other mental health concerns. It's something to discuss and really talk openly with them about.
I think it's great that you're mentioning this. And what I'm really hearing from you is, hey, parents, think about the downstream impact of if your kid gets on something that can alter them and they can get addicted to it. What does this mean in 10 years? Are they going to have a problem climbing stairs because all these receptors? I'm like a writer on Scrubs. I need you to fill in the gaps, doctor. Think about how beautiful our lungs are with all these little tiny things. We've all seen images of how it works. You're putting all of these artificial things in there. And there's no shame. If somebody does this, absolutely, if it's their choice. but to start really, really early, I think we can all agree we have to really just take pause and go, is this the best interest of the kiddos? For all of you parents out there, do I have the right to know my kid's passcode on their phone? And we'll get all these questions, Dr. Klock. We like to remind them, hey, if you were to buy your kids a car and let them drive it, would you want to keep a set of keys to that car because it's owned by you? And they go, absolutely. Great. And would you have the right to then check the trunk to see if their friends put something illegal back there or whatever? Absolutely. Same is true for some parents who think, oh, my kid has no privacy on this device that we call an iPhone. Well, you did buy it and it could badly hurt, just like a car, it could badly hurt your family's future, your child's safety, and also the families around your child. So you definitely were giving you the tough parenting cheerleading talk to say you have the right to be a tough parent right now. If your kids absolutely hate you once a month because you took their phone away and you limited their screen time, we are rooting for you. That's that tough parenting that might be okay in the long run. Just know that we're rooting for you. Now, doctor, let's talk about that other type of nicotine that's really hot right now. I was sitting next to a venture capitalist at a CEO dinner the other night, and he had this little tiny box, doctor, and it was a box the size of what I have on the screen right now. It was a little bigger than a Tic Tac box. I would say it was a 1 inch, 1.5 inches wide by, it was probably 3 inches long. I'm very blunt and bold in my life these days because I can be that way and develop relationships. And I said, hey, what's going on over there? What do you got in that little box? And he said, oh, yeah, this is my nicotine patch. And he was showing me the box and it's fascinating how it works. He goes, I use this brand for this reason. He said it has the 2/3 of it is the nicotine patches, the fresh ones. And it has a little tiny trash can in it that you open up the back and you put them in there so no one knows where they're at. It was so interesting. It was like a micro little cigarette box. You open it up, you pop one out, and he showed me he put it under his lip or in the side. And I didn't know that he had one. He's like, yeah, every 15 minutes, I take one of these. It does this, this, and this. And this guy was in immaculate health. He said it helped him focus. He and I were probably a lot alike. I'm going to speak for myself. I probably have ADD, but it was fascinating to see how small of a box that was, doctor. Small of a little tiny patch, which was a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch, perhaps, maybe a little bit bigger. Talk to us about what is that called? What is the brand parents should look out for? How are teens using it? Can you even notice if it's in their mouth? I couldn't. And what should we look for in that?
This is like really coming up a lot recently. And just a quick terminology thing. There are nicotine pouches, I think is what you're talking about. There is such a thing as a nicotine patch, which is often used to help people quit other versions of nicotine use. But what you're talking about are these pouches. And there are a bunch of different brands. I haven't seen that little rectangle version you're talking about with the built in receptacle. That's brilliant. So the one that I hear about the most is a brand called Zins. There's other ones, On and Rogue and Velo. There's a whole bunch of different brands. The teens actually call them like pucks or tins. They're like these little round, they look almost like, when you buy those gums or mints that come in a little plastic round container, that's what the container looks like. So it'd be very easy for a parent to just think that's gum. And so there are little pouches about the size of what you just showed. And what's inside is isolated nicotine. The rest of the tobacco product is not in there. It's just the isolated nicotine and chemical flavoring. And then they put them inside their mouth between their lip and their gums. Some prefer it up top, some prefer it down low. And they just sit there and basically the blood vessels in the mucosa of the mouth absorb the nicotine from the pouch. And that's how the nicotine gets into the bloodstream and then delivered to the brain and the body to have all of its effects. They're not brand new. They've been around for probably 2, maybe 3 years, but they are really taking off. The company that originated Zyn is based in Sweden. It's now owned by Philip Morris. So Big Tobacco is very much involved in this. And I have a friend who just got back from Sweden a few months ago. She said they are everywhere. They're littering the streets, I guess, because they don't have the little built-in receptacle like you're talking about, right? So people are like putting them in, taking them out, throwing them all over the place. I was just with a group of ninth grade boys and I asked them, like, is this coming up? Are you seeing that? And they were like, oh, yeah. Like, everybody knew what that was. And it is, again, it's discreet, right? Because it's sort of just tucked in there. One young person I interviewed said that he was using it because he could no longer make it through a whole class without getting up to go to the bathroom to vape. And so this way he's able to just have it sit there and the teacher doesn't know he's using it, right? And it gets him through the length of a class. So there's potent, nicotine in there and the effects are a little bit longer. Um, and there's concerns about whether this may end up long term having effects on gum and oral health, but all the same concerns that we have about nicotine that's delivered in other ways are there, although they're not inhaling into their lungs. So, from that perspective, perhaps it'll end up being a little better, but we don't, we just don't have the data yet on this. It should not be considered a safe option for people who are trying to quit. Maybe they've been vaping or smoking and they're trying this as a way to quit that. Again, we just don't have the data. We do have data for FDA approved nicotine replacement in the form of patches and gum and lozenges and stuff like that. And you can get those over the counter if you're over 18. If you're under 18, you would need to get a prescription from a provider, and they sort of do it off label. But a lot of pediatricians and family doctors will do that for adolescents who are needing help to quit.
Let's say that a parent knows their kid's doing this and the kid's, I'm just going to say it is really addicted to this, because it's very easy to become addicted. We
Yeah.
all have met people, anybody listening to this right now, we know how hard it is to quit smoking. People go, I tried to quit. I've tried to quit 15 times.
Yeah.
And it's that thing. So what would your advice be from an emotional, psychological, and medical way? And you really are a teen expert. You're different than other medical doctors because you're giving these talks. This is why I love you so much. What do you suggest to parents on some physical activities, some words they can say to their kids, some precautionary tales to get kids to realize the impact of whether it's vaping or these little pouches?
Yeah.
What would you tell them?
You said one thing earlier that this is a good time to come back to it about, no shame, right? For people who
Yeah.
who are using what other ever substance, right? And so I think, I approach this, as I said earlier, from this perspective of health and safety, right? That not without any moral judgment on this is not like a lack of moral character. So I think it really comes down to parents educating themselves, not trying to have these conversations in the heat of the moment when they just found out and they're flipping out themselves, right? So educate yourself, think through this, and then approach your child when you can do so during a time of calm so you can have a constructive conversation. And I think that conversation needs to be rooted in a place of curiosity and not blame and shame, right? And just say what you're noticing. And then you can talk through some of these facts that you're learning from us on this podcast that you're going to research on your own, but talking with them about what you're noticing and also thinking about what else might be going on, right? Sometimes kids are using these products because they're curious and they're just experimenting, or it's a peer influence situation. And that's what's sort of the culture that they're in. But sometimes these kids are self medicating. There's like underlying mental health concerns, and we're in the midst of a teen mental health crisis, and there's still so much stigma around mental health disorders. And so that's another thing, parents, if you are like worried about your child's anxiety or you think they have depression, like please don't ignore it, right? That's something that needs to be addressed. And some kids need therapy, some kids need therapy and medication, and get that help for them, because in the absence of that, they will eventually find other ways to make themselves feel better. And oftentimes that's where substances come into the story.
I heard a great phrase the other day, and I was reading a really terrific book, and it said, "Show me an addiction, and I'll show you a solution." Sometimes the nicotine pouch, the vaping is a solution to that anxiety or something like that,
Right.
where some people see it as the problem, and maybe your kid is just saying, "I need a solution, and maybe I need help." Um, the doctor is so right. We all love our therapists, our counselors. We support them. We do think it's a really great thing. I do want to pause for just a really quick second. Doctor, I got a random call from the government, and they said you've been elected to be in this drug awareness program, Los Angeles DEA. I went through a 6-week program where fentanyl scientists came up from to Los Angeles, and we went through a deep dive,
Yeah.
multi-week training of 3 hours each of here's how fentanyl works. Here's what's going on. They invited me because we teach a lot on how easy it is to buy fentanyl pills on Snapchat. Snapchat has actual menus. The drug dealers are getting smarter than the rest of us. They innovate. This is why my life's mission and Dr. Klock's mission is to get a little ahead of the game and to help parents have that awareness. But I do want to warn people, we don't want to ever shame, but we do want to talk about, hey, if your kids are really into maybe these pouches or something else, could there also be something else they're seeing on social media that goes, hey, if you're looking for another upper, to study better. $20 a pill is this, 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 and this, and it helps you study. We are seeing a huge influx. I want to get Dr. Clark, I want to get your opinion on this. We're seeing a huge influx on these pills. They are laced with things. I asked the government, like, are we able to get rid of this? And they said, Josh, we don't even know the impact we're making. They don't even know if we're making a dent, right? So parents, the reason why we're having Dr. Clark on here is there's a lot out there, people trying to chat with your kids on these devices that are Snapchat, and they're literally blatant about, here's a menu for 20 bucks. Let me know, and we'll meet around the block, and I'll sell you 5 of these. Just get a few $20 bills from your parents and so on. Dr. Clark, I want to talk to you and dive into the fentanyl thing and just really catch you off guard, to be honest, because what are you seeing? We talk about vaping, we talk about the nicotine pouches. What are you seeing on counterfeit Xanax, Percocet, all these other things that the government taught me and showed me? Here's the machines in these clandestine operations that are made so fast. There's going to be a parent here going, hold on, Josh, they're business people. They don't want to kill their audience, their buyers. Yes, but the government said they're moving so quick because they're going to get caught that they're scientists. I'm air quoting for everybody listening right now. They're not real scientists. They're scientists. They're mixing people are mixing so fast. They don't know who's going to die and get 14 extra grams of this that will kill a child within 15 minutes. So these are the things that we learned here at Smart Social that are impacting. Dr. Klock, set me straight. What do I have wrong? What would you tell parents about this epidemic that we're seeing?
Right. First off, I just want to make it clear for people that as of right now, I'm not hearing about fentanyl finding its way into nicotine products. So this is a separate conversation. So just to back up a little bit. So nicotine is a very powerful opiate. So it is in that same family. It's a 50 times more potent than heroin, 100 times more potent than morphine. It's in that sort of class. There is a pharmaceutical grade fentanyl that is used by anesthesiologists. It's used as surgery. It's used for pain control. That's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about illicitly manufactured fentanyl that's coming in often from foreign countries and being trafficked into our country. And it has found its way into the black market, into illicit drugs. It's in the heroin supply. It's in the cocaine supply. It's in a whole bunch of different drugs, including these counterfeit pills. And that's what you're alluding to. So there are all of these pills out on the black market that look exactly like a Xanax or like a Percocet or an Oxy or like an Adderall, right? So these are medications that teens might be familiar with. Maybe they or someone in their family has been prescribed them in the past, the legitimate version, but these look exactly like the real thing, but they're fakes. And the current data right now is, according to the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency that you're talking about, so is that currently in the US, 7 out of 10 of these fake pills have a potentially lethal dose of fentanyl. 2 milligrams is their definition of a lethal dose. And so what is so concerning is, again, because you can't tell the difference if it's real or not just by looking at it. There are things like fentanyl test strips. That's a whole other conversation. But sometimes kids are getting them, like you're saying, off of Snapchat, right? Or from social media dealers. And sometimes they call them plugs. That's what they did a few years ago. I don't know if they're still calling them plugs these days, but like they will connect with people on Snapchat and get delivered pills. And where I am sort of more anecdotally and from the news, same news stories you're all probably hearing, but here in LA, where we've been seeing these young people dying from fentanyl poisonings, which I consider it a poisoning. That's sort of the terminology we're using because they don't mean to be taking that, right? They're taking a pill that if that pill was the real thing, whether we think they should be taking it or not, it wouldn't kill them if they were just taking that on its own. But because it's laced with fentanyl, it can potentially kill a person because it's such a potent drug that basically suppresses your drive to breathe. So people stop breathing and that's how they end up dying. And so this is like a really important conversation. When I talk with teens, one of the things I tell them is that like the random Snapchat dealer does not care about their health or wellness, right? They're trying to make money, but sometimes groups of teens use the same dealer and they feel like they have a relationship. Maybe the dealer is like not on Snapchat, maybe the dealer is another kid at their school, right? Or someone that they know, but the dealers don't even know what's in the drugs that they're dealing most of the time. So that is really important for teens to understand what the risks are and that these are really real risks. It's not to be a scare tactic. It's like, this is the reality of what's out on the streets right now. And so you're putting your life at risk. This is not just, again, for parents to understand, this is not just people who are suffering from addiction who are dying. These are sometimes first time users or very occasional recreational users that just unfortunately got one of these fakes that had enough fentanyl in it to kill them.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Klock. It is important, parents, have a dialogue with your kids about this earlier and often. And even if they roll their eyes, you know that you've done that. It's not a one and done, maybe a little discussion, dialogue here and there. Thank you to the many school districts that support us and support our research here at smartsocial.com as we do our parent night events all over the country for school districts who want to engage parents, both in English, Spanish, and Mandarin. We're teaching on TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, every single hot app. We have a parent night event. Thank you to the many dozens and dozens of school districts that are using our multilingual engagement events and customer service to bring hundreds of thousands of students and parents up to speed. We're really grateful for all of you. Dr. Klock, I'd like to ask you for final words. What is your advice to parents who are like, how do I get ahead? What dialogue starters do I have with my kids to start opening them up so that we can talk about this earlier rather than later?
Yeah, I mean, especially for those of you with younger kids, it's never too early to start these conversations. But even if your kid's in high school or heading off to college, it's still worth having this conversation. And again, I think it's starting from a place of curiosity. You can use this podcast recording as your jumping off point. I was just listening to this podcast. They were talking about these nicotine pouches. Like, what are those? Is that something you're seeing? What is that? They said Zins was one brand. Like, what is that? Just be curious and let them teach you, right? And some are going to be more open than others. But I think that that is really important rather than sort of interrogating them, right? We want to open these conversations and have them proactively rather than just trying to catch them in the act. That's not the ideal way to go about it, right? And then once you've opened that door to the conversation, you can express your concerns from that safety and health perspective, right? Again, try to leave the shame and the judgment at the door. And you can weave in your values too, right? What you believe they should and shouldn't be doing and why, and what are your hopes for them. And I think also meeting kids where they are in terms of, your children best. No one knows a kid better than their parents, right? And so you know what their genuine interests are, right? Maybe they're an athlete, or maybe they're like someone who's just super academic, or maybe they're an artist or whatever. And like, talk about their hopes, talk about their dreams, and then you can talk about what your concerns are about substance use and how that might derail. And most importantly, talk about mental health. Talk about anxiety, talk about depression, talk about you have a kid with ADHD, just keep talking and check in with them and see how they're doing and make sure that they're getting the supports that they need, because they will likely need more support than just an occasional conversation with mom and dad.
Dr. Klock, I'm so honored to have you as a friend, but also thank you so much for the work that you're doing with teens, tweens, parents, to teach all the things you're doing. You're absolutely incredible. Thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you, Josh. It's always so great talking with you.
To the rest of you who are listening or watching, we're so grateful for not only Dr. Klock and the many other amazing people out there, but also the school districts who are fighting the good fight, really trying to nurture kids to become more resilient. So by the age of 25, they are ready for the world. They've made their mistakes in middle school and high school in a safe place at mom and dad's house or at the school. So they learn how to make those failures early and often. And when they're in college or a career, that they're doing great things. They're able to manage these devices and the relationships that are brought to them. Billions of people accessing them via their phone. How do we teach that early and often? We call it keeping kids safe on social media so they someday can shine online. And that's our mission here at Smart Social. We hope you'll have that early and often dialogue with your kids. And as the title of my books say, remember to always keep it light, bright, and polite, because your kids are watching. We'll see all of you on a future episode. I'm so grateful. Thank you, doctor, for today. We'll see you, the rest of you, soon. Have a great day. Thank you for listening to the smartsocial.com podcast with this week's topics. We invite you to join the smartsocial.com VIP program. As a very informed parent VIP member, you will learn about the dangers and benefits of social media for your kids and get tips every week to keep your family safe online, and most importantly, to teach your students how to shine online. We have over 130 detailed app guides that cover apps like TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, and 100 plus apps you might not have heard of, but your students may have visited or downloaded. Find out more and join today at smartsocial.com/VIP. Please remember to rate, subscribe, and review so we can continue to help more parents and educators just like you. I'm your host, Josh Ochs. As always, remember to keep it light, bright, and polite. We'll see you on the next episode. Have a great day.